Welcome back to Screen Review. My name is Megan.
And I'm Dina. Don't forget to follow us at Boca Tribune on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
All right, today we're going to be reviewing the Social Network movie on Netflix. It was released in 2010. It's rated PG-13, and it's 2 hours long. So first, Dina, if you just want to give us your overall thoughts, impressions about the movie.
Overall, a movie, I actually really enjoyed this one. I liked how they showed kind of this whole business side of Facebook and the whole kind of relationships that went into Facebook. Also, Jesse Eisenberg, an incredible actor, just incredible. His fast-paced speaking, I think, is one of his biggest traits, and I really liked his acting in this movie. I think he did a really good job at kind of portraying this businessman sorts, genius of sorts, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
But you, Megan?
Yeah, no, I agree. And the thing is, I told you earlier, I watched it a few years after it first came out, and I had to rewatch it, obviously, for this show. And for some reason, I went into it thinking that I wasn't going to enjoy it like I had the first time that I watched it. But I really, really liked it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It still held up in terms of quality. I really liked it. And as, you know, we're huge Jesse Eisenberg fans, so we're just going to talk about that the whole time.
Probably.
He just did a nice job with this movie. He captured exactly kind of what you think and, videos and things you've seen of Mark Zuckerberg. He kind of captured that in his acting. He just did a really nice job.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, it was a little bit dramatized and everything, but, it was well done. And throughout the whole movie, they kind of jump around in time a little bit, but I found that kept the movie really interesting and didn't make it too boring and kind of monotonous.
Mm-hmm.
So I really liked it, if you couldn't tell.
Yeah, both of us, I would say.
Yeah.
I think now we can just go into the actual review, I guess, part discussion, more spoilers. Yeah. So if you haven't watched the movie yet, go watch it and come back. This will be accessible after on YouTube, so at Boca Tribune.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I guess we'll just kind of talk about the movie a little bit more, kind of containing spoilers, though. So, essentially, this movie follows, Mark Zuckerberg, obviously, throughout his time at Harvard when he was in college, and takes him to not necessarily where he is today, but to being a successful CEO of Facebook, kind of the Mark Zuckerberg that we know. And it's taking place in the 2000s, so 2003 to 2007 or so, I want to say, around then, or 2009, something like that.
I think it starts in 2005 or 6 or 4, something like that.
In the 2000s in general.
Yeah.
But regardless, so Dina, I know you liked the opening scene. If you kind of wanted to talk about our kind of first meeting of Mark Zuckerberg.
So it kind of starts, you're in this, I guess, bar type situation, and he's on a date with this girl. I honestly don't remember what he was talking about in this scene, but it's just this really good scene where again, Jesse Eisenberg's kind of really fast paced, very intense kind of speaking, I guess, and he just goes on this rant about I don't even know what, and the girl he's with is kind of debating with him, and it's just this very fast-paced scene. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just I love that scene so much. And eventually they just break up because basically this girl's kind of you're just not girls don't like you because you're a nerd. They don't like you because you're just a horrible person. So that's how the scene ends, but from start to finish, that whole kind of bar scene is just really good. And from that, he creates this he starts blogging while he's drunk, which Megan researched is kind of true. Not the things he said necessarily, but the blog itself was true. And while he's blogging, he made this thing called Face Smash, right? Something like that, with all the people in Harvard, and basically they just rated all of the girls, they would compare them, and it became a huge hit in Harvard. That was kind of the beginnings, I guess, of Facebook. They kind of went off of that idea, right?
A little bit. So, that was kind of, again, in the movie, it showed him, he was upset that he just got dumped by this girl, Erica, and so he was you know what? I'm going to go ahead and have everyone have the opportunity to rate all of the women at Harvard. So, essentially, it was kind of this website, and they had two girls' pictures, one next to one another, and you voted right or you voted left. And he kind of decided who was more attractive to you, and it totally crashed Harvard's network, so you couldn't access any internet or anything. There's so many people overloading the server, and so that was kind of what he was intending. And so after that, because of that, he ended up getting 6 months of academic probation because of that action. And actually, the face mash thing is real. Mark Zuckerberg did actually do that. And while blogging the whole time, he did actually do that. So
yeah. So because of that, he like became this like, I guess, like hit at Harvard. I mean, the girls didn't like him because of it, but a bunch of like guys thought he was like revolutionary. Like he created this like crazy code or whatever. I'm no computer person, but apparently it was like this crazy code he created.
Yeah, I mean, he built a whole entire website in one night while drunk.
That's true. Pretty incredible.
It's impressive.
But yeah, I mean, he is pretty smart, I would say. So from that, like all these people were like kind of like, oh my God, like, I mean, he wasn't necessarily famous, but a lot of people knew who he was because he crashed the entire Harvard internet server. So these two twins, the Winklevoss twins, they kind of like approach him and are like, we have this really good idea for essentially like a dating website for people in Harvard. So it was basically, he was like, what's the difference between that and like MySpace, Mark Zuckerberg was saying. And they were like, the only difference is that like this would be only for people at Harvard. So it's like more exclusive. So that kind of like piqued his interest, like, ooh, like, I guess this kind of like, in exclusivity of all of these people at Harvard. You think of Harvard students, you already think of these whole like stereotypical, like exclusive, like club type people. So for them, it was like, ooh, we get our own dating network too. Like, So that idea kind of like, I guess, popped something in him, right?
Yeah, it definitely did. And pretty much right after that, you see Mark Zuckerberg go to his best friend in the movie, Eduardo Saverin, and he kind of pitches him this idea for the Facebook, kind of, what the Facebook we know today is. So it was called the Facebook. And he said, essentially, I had this idea, like, I'll build a whole website. I can do all of it. It's just social media. He just essentially describes what it is. What his plan for it is, and he needs Eduardo to give him money to kind of get everything started. And so, he promises Eduardo, oh, you'll be co-founder, like I'll take 70%, you take 30%, and we're in this together. Like you just kind of be my financial backer. You're the CFO, I'm the CEO. And so they kind of come to this agreement together. Eduardo says that he'll do it. But meanwhile, the whole time, I mean, this kind of almost jealousy is brewing inside of Mark Zuckerberg, which I find is very interesting because I know you mentioned at the bar scene in the beginning with him and Erica, what he was talking about. He was talking about, I think it's called like the First Clubs or something like
Finals
that.
Club.
Finals Club.
Finals Club, yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's what they're called. So essentially there's like super like elite, not necessarily secret society, but just like a society within Harvard. Like I know he said there's the Phoenix Club, the Porcellian Club, things like that. They're just where like,
yeah, back to this like exclusivity, like
exactly. It's an even more exclusive subset of an already extremely exclusive university. So of course, Mark Zuckerberg absolutely wanted to be in it, and so he was talking to Erica about how much he wanted to be in it and what he could do to get into it. But regardless, so the club that Mark Zuckerberg wants to get into is the Phoenix Club. Essentially, it's like the best one, most prestigious or something. I think Theodore Roosevelt was in it. He mentioned during his extremely long monologue in the beginning. But regardless, his friend Eduardo is being recruited by the Phoenix Club. And so that obviously kind of irks Mark, and you see that kind of spiral throughout the entire movie. And I know that Eduardo later accuses him of being jealous that he was being recruited by the Phoenix Club and Mark wasn't. And that's why, spoiler, but the relationship kind of fizzles out towards the end as Facebook keeps growing.
Right. And but keep in mind also, like, while we're seeing these scenes, they're also like going back and forth between a court case in the movie. They're going back and forth. And I feel as though this isn't really a spoiler. There was a huge court case with Mark Zuckerberg. We were talking about it earlier. There has been so many court cases with Mark Zuckerberg since the beginning of Facebook, the dawn of Facebook, you could say. There has been so many, like, he's had so many accusations, so many court hearings, whatever. So this one you're seeing like this, like he's in a mediation room. One is with the Winklevoss twins and the other is with Eduardo, his best friend. And can I just say, Winklevoss twins look scarily alike in real life. Like,
they do.
Scarily identical. And also they're played by Armie Hammer, who I will say they didn't do very well with this whole twin thing. there were moments where you could tell that was not Armie Hammer standing next to Armie Hammer. It was like Armie Hammer and a stunt double, and they would like show his face too. It was pretty bad, right?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it's just I don't know why they didn't cast actual twins, but regardless,
right.
Sure.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, at this point, you know, throughout the whole movie, you kind of see the Facebook evolve into modern day Facebook. You know, this idea that Mark Zuckerberg had that he stole, modified and stole from the Winklevoss twins, essentially. And he kind of has grown it now into this, you know, multi-billion-dollar business. And I mean, you take it from humble beginnings all the way up to like 1 million people on there, or 500 million. I don't know.
It ended the movie. At the end of the movie, it was 1 million or 100 million.
Yeah, I think it's 500. Yeah, it's like 100 million, couple 100 million, regardless. So you see it taken from this, and I mean, it's almost as if he's being corrupted the whole time. But then if you think back to it, it's like, was he ever really good to begin with? No. And so it was just interesting to see Mark Zuckerberg painted as this kind of villain the whole time. I mean, he definitely was, I guess, the villain of the movie. And Mark Zuckerberg himself has commented on the social network saying that the movie made up things and he found it very hurtful. So that's sad. But regardless, so this whole time, you know, he takes the Facebook from being just this idea that he pitched to Eduardo Savern outside of like a little sad fraternity party. And, you know, he takes it to where it is today. And he does this through not so great means. So I guess I'll kind of discuss one of the other major characters, Sean Parker. And he is essentially this guy. He created something called Napster. And I don't know what Napster is. I will be completely honest. But he created Napster, and it was kind of this free music sharing app thing. And essentially, he didn't make any money off of it necessarily. And so he was unemployed, but he called himself an entrepreneur. So don't worry, he's an entrepreneur. He was unemployed. He didn't really have any money. And Mark Zuckerberg kind of took his advice very seriously and started basing a lot of Facebook's early decisions, off of Sean Parker's advice. And so this kind of, in the movie at least, made Eduardo very, very upset because, you know, Eduardo was CFO and he had all this power to make decisions, things like that. But Zuckerberg was listening to Sean Parker instead, and Sean Parker didn't really necessarily seem like a very good guy. They definitely did not portray him to be a good guy. He was definitely very heavy into partying and all kind of the downsides of being rich and famous at that age. So it was interesting to see kind of Zuckerberg being corrupted even more in a sense. But again, I mean, this is all heavily dramatized, so I don't know how much of it is really real, but I mean, it's kind of like a he said, she said kind of thing, because I believe this movie was based off of a book. I don't really remember the name of the book at this point, but it's based off a book. Yeah, regardless. So essentially, like Dina was saying earlier, it was kind of going back and forth between all these court cases and then, you know, moving through the storyline of Facebook. And eventually Sean Parker convinces Zuckerberg to move to California. He says that, you know, California is where it's happening. Like, you're not going to be able to create it or make it better, make the Facebook better in this outside setting that is Harvard. And so, you know, he eventually moves to California. And I believe I did not mention this earlier, but it was funny. The reason he decided to expand outside of the Harvard campus was because, like Dina was mentioning earlier, his ex-girlfriend, Erica Albright, he wanted to be able to make sure that she knew what Facebook was, that he created this website, this company. And so he like ran into her one night at dinner or something, and he asked, "Oh, have you heard of, you know, the Facebook? Have you heard of the website that I made?" And she said no. And so then he immediately went back to his dorm room and told Eduardo and all the other people that she absolutely needed, they needed to expand outside of it. So they decided to go to like Yale, Columbia, and I think Stanford at that point as well. Yes, Eduardo wanted to be Stanford as well. And they wanted to publish about it in the BU student newspaper, which is where Erica went. So, Dina, can you hear me okay? You know.
Yeah, I can hear you. You can hear me.
Okay, that's
sorry.
No, you're fine. No, you're fine. You were having internet troubles earlier. It's no big deal.
Yes.
But what you missed, I talked about Sean Parker a little bit. I just touched on the beginnings of Sean Parker. I touched on expanding, you know, outside of Harvard to the other universities. And then I think I'm kind of talking about now how Mark moved to California. So I didn't cover that much.
Yeah. So did you talk about all of how Mark is in California?
I'm sorry?
Did you talk all about how Mark is in California?
No, I just talked about how
right now.
Ooh, all right, I'm just gonna keep going. So Mark is able to go to California based off of Sean Parker's advice, and he does this to give Facebook its best chance in a sense, and to kind of be able to expand it. And I mean, Sean Parker is definitely portrayed as a horrible person in this movie. He definitely is. Again, like I said earlier, like way too into partying, way too in the downsides of being, young and successful in a sense, even though Napster wasn't really doing well at that time, but he still was able to create a company at that young age, and he had notoriety in a sense. So Mark trusted him, and they were able to start working together on this through California, because he moved to California, and of course he didn't reach out to Sean Parker right away, but they had like a chance running into one another, which was interesting. It was kind of, they didn't know. Yeah, I think one of the guys was zip lining off of the chimney into the pool, and he broke the chimney. And so Sean Parker happened to be Mark Zuckerberg's neighbor when this happened, and he ran over to check to see if everything was okay, and they reconnected. And Sean Parker actually ended up moving into the house that Zuckerberg was living at in Palo Alto, California. Now, this, of course, isn't true. I mean, that was dramatized for the movie effect, but what actually happened is they, ran into each other on a street or something. So I thought that was funny that they decided to dramatize that. But regardless, so you see kind of Sean taking Mark underneath his wing, in a sense, and introducing him to all these Silicon Valley people. And at this point, Eduardo is in New York doing an internship. So, Eduardo is the CFO, but he's all the way on the other side of the country. So he's not exactly able to contribute much. So it's kind of all falling on Mark's shoulders. And so Mark is leaning more and more on Sean Parker for help because Eduardo's far away. And at this point, you kind of see Mark and Eduardo's relationship start to have way more trouble than it is. And this is where, in the court hearing that he keeps flipping back and forth too, you see definitely the strain that the relationship is having. So, Dina, welcome back.
Yes.
You're welcome. I talked more about California and how Sean Parker and Mark are now kind of working with one another again.
Yeah.
And I mentioned Eduardo is now on the other side of the country, and their relationship is straining a little. So that's what you missed. Not much.
Right. So at this point, so thank you. Sorry again. He's at this like internship, right? But we later find out, which like really annoyed me, that apparently he quit on the first day. But like Mark kept just saying like, oh, Eduardo's at this internship. But like Eduardo was there with like this girlfriend that like he basically hated, who was like actually psychotic, which I thought was like really funny. Like there was like a scene where like she literally like he gets her a present and she like lights it on fire. And then afterwards, like he's like, he wants to break up with her, and she's like, "Why are you sad?" And like he's like, "What?" Like she's literally psychotic. But I got really frustrated when Mark said that like, oh, like that we found out that Eduardo quit this internship on the first day just because Mark was like so much leaning on Sean Parker and like going over the fact that like, oh, Eduardo's at this internship, he doesn't care about Facebook, but like he knew that he quit on the first day, which was like very bothersome for me. I was like, that's kind of an annoying thing to do, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So, continue.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, you see all these kind of inconsistencies with Mark kind of come in and out at this point. I mean, Eduardo told him about this internship and how he actually wasn't, he quit on the first day, etc. And then, I mean, Mark he's like, oh, yeah, you did tell me that. Like, I just forgot. Like, he said that. Yeah. I didn't remember, things like that. So, I mean, it's just interesting to see him. Yeah. Like, he was definitely making excuses for Eduardo in the beginning with Sean Parker, like you were saying. How, he's saying, oh, like, Eduardo's at his internship, like, he's in New York, whatever. But then, I mean, it's interesting because Eduardo kind of fires right back at Mark, and he says, oh, like, I've been working with advertisers. Like, I've been, riding subways 14 hours a day trying to get ad revenue for our Facebook. Because at this point, they're trying to monetize it. And Eduardo heavily wants to put advertisement on the website. I think Mark and Sean were looking more for investors versus straight up advertisements, because they said advertising isn't cool, which is fair.
Yeah. I guess, you don't really want to see ads on things, I guess. But
I don't.
I thought what was funny was, like you said, how like there's like these inconsistencies in Mark's character. I mean, there was like at the very, very end, there was like this point where this like lawyer lady kind of like said to Mark, she was like, "You're not a bad person, Mark. You're just like trying too hard to be." Which she said that, and it kind of like give you this like clarity on his character. Like that's so true. Like he's trying to be this Sean Parker that he's very obviously not. He's very obviously this like geeky, like, you know, nice guy in his heart, but he just A, wants to be successful, and B, sees that success comes from being an arrogant person, you know? So I just thought that was like a whole, you kind of got this like clarity from his character after that lady said that, at least in my opinion.
No, definitely, I agree. And it's kind of like the whole time, I mean, in a sense, most people watching that movie, you know, you're rooting for Mark. You want him to do well. I mean, you obviously know that he's going to. He's the CEO of Facebook. Still.
I mean, yeah.
You know,
we're currently on Facebook.
We are on Facebook, but
so you know,
thanks, Mark. But
yeah, exactly.
In a sense, you know, most people watching that movie, you know, you want him to do well, you want him to succeed, whatever. But this movie definitely portrays him as kind of a bad guy. They really do, like all of the things that he does. I mean, the thing in the very beginning, like one of the first things that his character does is create that little website rating girls.
Exactly. Like, yeah. Did you already go over during my whole, you know, fiasco about Sean Parker's the Facebook thing?
Oh, when you told him to drop the?
Yeah.
No, I didn't, but go ahead.
Oh, well, basically he said drop the, and like in the movie they made it this very dramatic thing where they were like, Sean Parker gave Mark this like the best advice he could ever have. Instead of calling it the Facebook, call it just Facebook. And they just made it a very dramatic scene at that. It was when they first met Sean Parker. It was just like, I thought that was a funny scene because they made it like such a big deal, which, you know, I guess it kind of is like kind of the image of your brand, but I just thought it was funny that they made it like such like a big thing.
They did. It was really funny. Well, regardless, one of the scenes that I definitely want to mention is at the point when Facebook first starts becoming global. So I know that Sean Parker promised Mark Zuckerberg that he will take Facebook on to like 2 continents by the end of the month or year or something. And the scene in which it happens, or the audience finds out that it does happen, is when the Winklevoss twins are at their rowing competition in England somewhere. Somewhere in England, they're doing like an international rowing competition or something. And you find out that it's gone global after they lose their rowing competition, first of all. So they're already obviously very upset because throughout the whole movie, it's been a very, reoccurring theme that they train hard for their rowing thing. They're so good at it. They're the best, but they end up losing by like the smallest amount, like a hair they lose by. And apparently, in rowing, they even say this, it's more common to lose by like 1 or 2 like full boat lengths versus like having it be that close. I don't know how accurate that is, but that's what they said. And so one of the people at the party after the rowing competition comes up to them and says, oh, have you heard of this thing like Facebook? My daughter's using it at school. And it's just interesting that, they're just like, this person's just trying to make polite conversation with the Winklevoss twins, and they end up saying the worst possible thing. And at this point in the kind of past storyline, this is when one of the Winklevoss twins, again, they're identical. I think it was Cameron, finally agrees that they're going to sue Mark Zuckerberg for stealing their idea. Yeah, for stealing their idea of, originally it was called Harvard Connection. It was the Winklevoss's idea, and turning it into Facebook. And now it's an international kind of social media site. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and like in this theme of people deciding to sue Mark Zuckerberg, we have this whole thing with basically the biggest thing is with Eduardo, where basically they sell Facebook. I don't really know how business things work, but they sell something, I don't really know, to this man named Peter Thiel, right? That's his name, I believe.
Yes.
And so from this, he gives like an angel investment, which is like basically, I think, like investors that just like kind of invest in things, but they don't have anything to really do with it, which is what they say actually Eduardo is. In real life, Eduardo Savern, they call him an angel investor. But basically, so Peter Thiel is this angel investor who invests $500,000 in Facebook and gives them an office, which is essentially like the biggest rise in Facebook. This is when it starts going global. This is when they start having like a big team, interns, like it gets big. And so from that, Mark asks Eduardo to sign these like contracts or whatever. And Eduardo, the funniest thing, doesn't read the contracts. He just kind of is like, okay, like kind of excited that Facebook is getting big. He doesn't read the contracts, which is his first mistake, because later we find out that Eduardo basically sold his share of Facebook to the point where his kind of income from Facebook went from 30% to 0.03% is how much he was getting. And from that, he was like, Mark, you will be hearing from my lawyers, basically. There was like a lot more into that, but I just was like, everyone else's share kind of remained the same. They had like, Mark's was like 51%, and what's his name? Sean's was like 7%. These two other guys also had like 7% or something. And it was just, yeah. It was, I felt, you know, you kind of felt bad for Eduardo, but also you didn't, because you were like, you were the stupid person who didn't read the contracts in the first place.
I know. So like, let that be a lesson. If you're signing anything, read the contract, definitely. But other than that, I mean, it's interesting because this whole time, I mean, the whole time I was watching the movie, I was like, wow, I feel so bad for Eduardo. Like, how could Mark do this to his best friend, all of this? But then, you know, I went and looked it up after, and apparently Eduardo was not as good of a guy as they made him out to seem in this movie, which I thought was definitely interesting. I mean, he did so many things. So, you know, when he was in New York doing his internship, when really he quit, Facebook was completely broke, and Zuckerberg's family actually had to take out loans. So it's not, you know, as they painted him to be the only financial backer pretty much the entire time. That wasn't necessarily the case. Another thing is that Eduardo put free ads up on Facebook for his own startup company without telling anyone.
I did read about that too, actually, a few years ago. Just
kind
ridiculous.
Of a no-no. Yeah, don't do that. At least ask someone. I'm sure Mark would have said yes. Maybe not, but if he said no, he kind of had a right to.
Right.
But
so
regardless, so he just did a bunch of little kind of sneaky things that weren't shown in the movie, and so, you know, they make Eduardo seem like this victim the whole time. But in reality, I mean, sure, what happened was wrong, and Mark had no right to, you know, make it essentially trick him into selling all his shares or having his shares completely diluted down to almost nothing. But at the end of the day, read the contract. Don't be a bad person.
Basically, life lessons.
Yeah, definitely.
But the outcome of this case was that Eduardo is still considered the co-founder of Facebook, even though when you think of Facebook, you do think of Mark Zuckerberg. Sorry, Eduardo. And we don't know what his settlement was. They said at the end of the movie it was an unknown settlement. We do know that from the Winklevoss whole thing, they got $65 million out of Mark Zuckerberg, and they signed an NDA, which is kind of funny because we know how much they got out of there. Something had to be disclosed. So, but I did think that was interesting. Megan and I were talking about earlier, I guess, like, Mark Zuckerberg has so much money that to him probably it made more sense just to pay off the Winklevosses and say, like, don't talk bad about me in public, rather than, you know, kind of take the heat for it, which I thought was interesting. Kind of gives you an insight on these kind of multi-billionaire type people. But yeah, that's basically where the movie ends, I guess. You know, there's like this scene at the end, which I thought was interesting. I talked about this with Megan earlier, how after his case, you know, the day before his settlement, since we don't know what happened with the settlements, you know, it was unknown. It ends like the night before the settlement. And basically Mark is just like sitting in this office on a computer, and he searched up Eric Albright, the girl from the beginning, on Facebook, and kind of requests to be her friend. And then the scene is just Jesse Eisenberg just like refreshing the page until she adds him back, which is kind of like an interesting scene, considering like she in the beginning was like, I don't know what Facebook is, and then like he wanted it to be a thing for her, and also kind of just like kind of showed how lonely he was, because they did make it a very big kind of plot point about how Eduardo was his only friend and he betrayed him, you know, dramatize it for movie effect.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, overall, again, we didn't touch on exactly everything that happened in this movie. I mean, there was definitely little things here and there where you skipped over plot point wise. But overall, I mean, it's a really good movie. The acting is excellent. The writing is really good. And just, I mean, the overall storyline, you know, as fictional as it might be, you know, it's loosely based on a true story, we'll say, it's still extremely entertaining. And honestly, even though it was a 2-hour movie and I have like a bone to pick with 2-hour movies, they're just long, this didn't feel that long to me. So
Right.
about 2-hour
Totally
movies,
agree.
I get tired. But regardless, this
Yeah.
I was actively engaged the whole time, and I really think that was because they jumped around in time so much. It kept it really interesting the whole time.
For sure. I like that they went back and forth between the court case and, the real time, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess that's pretty much all that I have to discuss. That's really notable or worth mentioning on my part. Do you have anything else that you want to add, Dina?
No, I said what I wanted to say, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Dina, if you want to mention the social medias we could follow.
Yeah. Don't forget to follow us, Boca Tribune, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, also YouTube if you want to rewatch this later, or if you watch the social network and you want to see what we said later, don't forget.
Yes. So we'll see you guys next week. We're going to be covering I'm Thinking of Ending Things on Netflix.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Okay. Bye.